Hey, I'm so grateful that we get to be together this weekend for part 2 in our late summer series called Jesus Wisdom. And I just hope that you're having an outstanding weekend as we move toward the end of July. So I'm a coffee drinker, and often I'll walk into a coffee shop, walk up, order a dark roast coffee, and often the barista on the other side asks a question. She says, "Would you like room? Or would you like room for cream?" And why that question is asked is because if she fills it a little too full and then I try to add cream, liquid has a tendency to spill out of the top. So work with me for a minute on this imagery. There's a cup, and you pour a little in. Okay, pour a little more in. Pour a little more in, and right up to the top. Now, here's a question. If this cup does not represent a cup of coffee, but if this cup represented your life, here's the question. What are you full of? That is, if somebody bumps into you, what spills out? What are you full of? Now, in our Bible, we have 4 different biographies on the life, ministry, and teachings of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And when John, Jesus' disciple for 3 years, when he described who Jesus was, he talked in terms about what Jesus was full of. And so listen to this. You would find this in John chapter 1, verse 14, where John writes this. He says, Jesus was full of grace and truth. Jesus was full of grace and truth. So let's keep this kind of cup imagery and being full of something in our lives. And Jesus is like full of grace and full of truth. Now, I have thought about this imagery for years because it's been my experience that there are few people that have high grace and high truth. There are many, and let's move to this next image, who are what I would say low grace, high truth. Do you know what I mean by that? Someone barks, "You're in the way again." And we are. It's the truth, but not a lot of grace. It's just not that kind, high truth, low grace. And there's another type of person that seems to come across as this next image here: high grace, low truth. And that can sound like this. Someone asks, "Is everything okay?" And the answer is yes, and it's not okay. It hasn't been okay for months. It is so not okay. And it is unlikely to become okay unless there is a difficult, challenging, awkward conversation. Is everything okay? Oh, yes. And the person is incredibly kind, but the truth factor tends to run a little low. And so let's talk today, if we can move to the next image, just about what it means to be a person full of grace and full of truth. What does it look like to become a person who can be counted upon to offer what I call gracious truth and truthful grace? Gracious truth and truthful grace. And during our conversation today, I think this conversation about grace and truth would serve you best if somewhere in our conversation you could isolate one conversation or one relationship or perhaps one context where in your heart of hearts you were able to say, I'm low on truth in that relationship. A little more grace in this relationship. If you can narrow this down, not simply from great theory, but to a specific person, a specific relationship, or a specific environment or context, I believe this truth can transform your life. And so that verse that we looked at in John chapter 1, verse 14, Jesus being full of grace and truth, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a circle and we're gonna come back to that. But where I want to begin is by digging back into, before we approach the life and ministry of Jesus, I want to dig back into the Proverbs for several minutes and just take a moment talking about Proverbs on truth and then Proverbs on grace, and then circle back to this thing about Jesus being full of grace and full of truth. Now, Proverbs was where we spent our late spring and the first part of our summer. So many of you have read many of the Proverbs that we're going to look at right now. So let's start here together. Let's talk about Proverbs on truth, full of grace and truth. These are Proverbs on truth. Let's just begin here. Truth proverb. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. What's that all about? An enemy multiplies kisses. You may have people in your life that simply do not have your well-being in mind, but they will suck up. They will flatter. An enemy multiplies kisses. But that first part, wounds of a friend can be trusted. What's up with that? Why do you feel wounded by a friend who's attempting to speak into your life? You know, there might be a courageous friend who steps toward you and says, listen, I believe there's a train wreck ahead if this behavior goes unaltered. Unless this habit gets changed, unless this way is radically altered. I believe that there's a point in your future where you are going to be in a great deal of pain and you're going to devastate the people around you. This is what I believe the Proverbs speak of when it says wounds of a friend can be trusted. Someone who is willing to speak truth courageously into our life. But the point of the proverb is that often friends speak truth in a way that doesn't immediately comfort, but might be powerful in forming us into the person that God desires us to be and the person that deep inside we desire to be. A second proverb on truth, move with me to this one. The Lord detests lying lips, but delights in people who are. Here, it's giving God's opinion, God's vantage point. It says the Lord detests dishonest speech, detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy, people who keep their word. And you become trustworthy by doing what you said you would do. It's just a reminder about truth, to make promises that you can keep and keep the promises you make. The Lord delights when we are worthy of trust, when we're trustworthy. Now, that first statement there, the Lord detests lying lips, there's the ability to go, yeah, I don't get that at all. I mean, it's just words. It's just words. Words can't harm anyone, and we know better, don't we? This next proverb on truth, where it just says, like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow, is one who gives false testimony against a neighbor. Like a club, like a sword, like a sharp arrow. Have you ever had a time when someone said something about you that wasn't true? And you felt bludgeoned. You felt cut. You felt pierced because of the lie of another person. The power of this is just, listen, words can harm people. Lies can really hurt people. Like a club or a sword or a sharp arrow is one who gives false testimony against a neighbor. Lies can cause serious damage. This last proverb on truth is talking about grace and truth. This last proverb on truth, it has to do, I think, with what we would call business honesty in our business dealings. And I love the way the proverb goes. It just says, the Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. The idea of scales, balances. You put a commodity on one side of the scale and you put a weight on the other side of the scale to ensure the person you're selling to that it is actually, 10 pounds of grain or 5 pounds of potatoes or a pound of carrots. But the deal about scales is that they can be manipulated in your favor in a way that you're really not telling the truth. I mean, scales are still used around the world today. You might even see them at a farmer's market. Commodity on one side, like potatoes. You want to buy a pound of potatoes, 1 pound weight on the other side. And it's just the Lord delights in honest scales. He delights in business honesty. So I just want to challenge you in whatever kind of work you're in to commit yourself to the truth. And tell the truth about what the warranty actually covers and what the warranty doesn't cover. Tell the truth about the hours you're actually billing for. Was that really 2.5 hours or maybe like an hour and a half? Tell the truth about when you actually believe you will be able to get it done. And if you say, listen, I really can't get to that till Wednesday, tell the person, I really can't get to that till Wednesday. Do I deliver what I claimed to have delivered? See, these are Proverbs on truth. Question, what are these doing in your Bible? Well, I guess telling the truth about, business dealings or telling the truth with friends and, not lying about people. I assume, that's probably just a kinder way to live, a better way to live. That's true. But I think there's something deeper happening here. This deal about truth, speaking the truth, acting in truth, being trustworthy, I believe it is anchored in the very character of God. That is, I believe that God is trustworthy. First, some of the first words of the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there be light. And he is light, and in him there is no darkness, and in him there is no deception. And then God creates men and women in his own image. You see, when I am trustworthy, when my word can be counted on, I am being formed into the image of God, the God in whose image I am made. His character is forging my character. I believe that these Proverbs on truth are there, and they're repeated again and again and again because they are anchored in the very character of God. It honors my Creator when I devote myself to the truth. So before we move on to Proverbs on grace, which is our next step, I just need to pause for a moment. I need to give you some space to think about the people in your life, the relationship in your life, and just the environments or different contexts. And my question is this. The question is just, where would you find yourself? Where would you find yourself low on truth? Where would you find yourself low on truth? As we talk about truth, was there a client, a customer, a parent, a friend, where you just right now, in the quietness of where you are, just go, man, I just need to raise the truth in that relationship or in that environment. We can agree with the concept of grace and truth. I really believe this has transformative power when you narrow it to one relationship, one person, one environment where you just go, my goodness, my goodness, my goodness, a little more truth would be so helpful in this situation. So there's a question, where are you low on truth? See, what we're talking about here is gracious truth, truthful grace. And even as we talk about being low on truth, I just know that there are so many of you that go, Jeff, listen, Manion, the telling the truth isn't my problem. Man, I say it like it is, and I would just call a timeout real quick, and I say, okay, if you are deeply devoted to the truth, how do you share what you believe to be the truth? Have a dear friend, pastors in Monterey, California, He has preached at Ada Bible Church on a number of occasions. His name is Kevin Harney, a senior pastor and author. And at the beginning of the coronavirus thing, he was in Grand Rapids to see family. We had a chance to walk around, miles long walk together as we talked. And this issue of speech came up. Now, when Kevin was a teenager, I think he was a handful. And on this walk, Kevin said to me, he said, Jeff, my dad used to say, Kevin, it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. It's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. So let's turn now to the second concept we want to look at, which is just this Proverbs on grace thing. Not just what we're saying, but how we're saying it. So part 2, Proverbs on grace Proverbs. And again, we just want to look at a couple of these together. I love the first one. Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. Gracious words. They're like honey, like a honeycomb, sweet to the soul, healing to the bones. Last week, I was up north at a friend's cottage, got up, went for a bike ride in the morning, came back. There was some homemade bread there and a toaster. Plopped the toast into the toaster, this homemade bread. Out comes the crispy toast, peanut butter, and then some area honey, which was sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. How are gracious words like that? Gracious words are like honey, like the taste of honey, sweet to the soul, healing to the bones. When someone offers the word, I forgive you, and it leads toward their relationship becoming whole again, it's like sweet like honey. When we're walking through some very challenging times and someone just goes, listen, you're going to make it. God is gracious and we're around you. You're going to make it, and God is going to use this powerfully in your life. It's like the sweetness of honey on toast, sweet to the soul, healing to the bones, gracious words. Let's take a look at the second proverb here. The second proverb, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. Many of you have read this a couple times over the last few months. A gentle answer turns away wrath. Sometimes we run low on grace because the person that we're speaking to is low on grace. And if they start to snipe a little bit, if they're in a bad mood, it's very possible to answer them with the same edge that they brought into the conversation. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. What it's talking about here is the capacity for a gracious word to diffuse a verbal bomb. My experience is that many evenings that are disrupted by an argument, it's not the first comment that derails the argument. A harsh word is spoken, followed by a harsh answer or response, and things unravel from there. A gracious word. This is a gracious response. This third proverb is about gracious silence. It's not about the gracious word that you give, it's how you show grace by not repeating something. Check this out with me. Whoever would foster love covers an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. Something to remember here as you pursue grace and truth. Some things don't need to be repeated. But Jeff, what if it's true? There are some true things that don't need to be repeated. Often we view the word gossip as spreading false things about someone else. Sometimes gossip is spreading things about someone else that simply didn't need to be shared, that simply didn't need to be spread. Whoever would foster love covers an offense. Whoever repeats the matter has the potential of separating close friends. Some things just don't need to be repeated, even if they're true. So it's like gracious words, a gracious response, gracious silence. And there is even a proverb about gracious volume. Check this out with me. I love this one. If anyone loudly blesses their neighbor early in the morning, it will be taken like a curse. Early in the morning, you're just out of bed. Hey, how you doing? Hope you have a great day. Just go, could you just dial the volume down a little? I haven't had my coffee yet. So it's even about gracious volume, gracious words, gracious response, gracious silence, gracious volume. What's this doing in your Bible? Well, it's easy, Jeff. It's just make you a kinder person. What's this doing in your Bible? Again, I think something deeper is going on here. I think that grace is anchored in the very character and fabric and being of God. We sing the old hymn, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. What if grace isn't just something God does? What if grace is embodied in the very character of God? A little kid that goes to a children's program at church, a summer camp or a Sunday school class on a Sunday, often one of the first Bible verses that a young child is exposed to is John 3:16, which says, God loved the world so much that he gave his only son for us. He loves and he gives and he loves and he gives. This is the story of grace. It's about receiving something we didn't earn and do not reserve. Grace is woven into the very character and fabric of God. And when there are areas of my life where I'm low on grace and I see grace grow in that relationship or that environment, I can be assured that God is at work to form his character in me. And so I need to come back to the cups and ask you again about one relationship, one person, one environment. Any person in your life where you're running a little low on grace? Let's change that. It's probably true, so let's word it differently. Say, I tend to run low on grace when? Oh my goodness, I tend to run low on grace when my preschoolers, mom, what? Where is it that you tend to run low on grace? Do you tend to run low on grace when you're tired, when you find yourself exhausted? Do you find yourself low on grace when you find yourself repeating yourself again and again about an issue or topic that is really, really important to you and you find yourself running low on grace? Listen, this is a very important moment for us. Because unless you isolate this to one relationship, one environment, one person, I tend to run low on grace when I'm not sure this is going to take root in your life and in your behavior. And just gracious God, you love and you give and you love. Today I need another filling of you to be a person who is full of grace and truth. Full of grace, full of truth. And you go, Jeff, there is no way anybody's going to pull that off perfectly. Newsflash, you're right. We're going to mess up. We all do. In fact, there's only one person who nailed this perfectly. The one who came for us. Now, after traveling through the Proverbs a bit, we come back to John chapter 1 and the coming of Christ. So let's wrap up just by talking about this, by talking about Jesus as the fullness of grace and truth. John's biography of Jesus begins with these words, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. He's speaking about the Word. He's speaking about Jesus here. But I want something to catch with you that perhaps you've never seen before. In the very beginning of time, Before our planet was formed, Jesus was there. In the beginning was the Word. Well, that kind of would make him God. Exactly. Jesus is God in human form, the creator entering his broken planet. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Verse 14, those beautiful words, and the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory. This Word, which was with God and was God from the beginning, he became flesh. He took on a body and made his dwelling among us. It's a beautiful verse, but the Jewish readers who were familiar with the history of the Israelites, when they read those words in the first century, Jewish reader, history of Israel, the Word became flesh and what was that? Made his dwelling among us. I think an image that would have immediately clicked into their minds is the image of this right here. It's called the tabernacle. It's just an artist's rendition of, it's that season when the Israelites exit slavery in Egypt. They're traveling to the land of promise and they're out in the desert, and this tabernacle, this portable worship center, is set up in the very middle of the camp of the Israelites, who have their tents all the way around the tabernacle. See, God made his dwelling in the middle of them. And some of you that are looking at this, if you can make out like a cloud, almost looks like a tornado, the way this artist drew this up over here and go, what's up with that? It's like the presence of God traveled with the Israelites in this cloud. It was called the Shekinah cloud or the glory cloud. God was in the midst with his glory. Now, with this in mind, look again at how John the disciple describes the coming of Jesus. Now this Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The word that is used there is tabernacled among us or tented among us, and we have seen his glory. The powerful statement is like, okay, long ago with our ancestors, God made his presence known in the middle of the camp through a cloud, and now God makes his presence known in the middle of our world through a person and not through a crowd. The Word became flesh, took on flesh and blood, and tented among us. I love the way that Eugene Peterson, in his paraphrase of the Bible called The Message, I love the way he worded it. Peterson put it this way. He said, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into our neighborhood. The Creator becomes flesh and blood and moves into our neighborhood. Into our mess, into our brokenness. God comes near, God comes here. Emmanuel, the word means God with us. The Word that existed from the beginning of time became flesh and blood and moved into our neighborhood. Now, John, what was it like walking around with Jesus? What was he full of? And John answers, he was full of grace and he was full of truth. Full of grace and full of truth. My friends, we need to talk about bringing a little more grace. While this conversation about grace and truth is great for any century and any decade or any year, of the two, grace and truth, let me just focus on being a person of grace right here, right now. And some of you already sense where I might be headed with this, because right now there are 3 reasons to bring just a little more grace to the people around us. Do any of you know what those 3 reasons are? Think about March, think about May. Think about this coming November. Any reason we might need to lift the grace quotient a lot in relationship to the people around us. The 3 reasons that I'm thinking of just happen to be the virus, the protests, and the upcoming election. Because right now we live in a culture and we live in an environment and it's contagious. What is contagious is that people are high on opinion and low on grace. High on opinion and low on grace. So just one at a time here, the virus. There are individuals who treat this virus very, very, very seriously and believe that we need to take every precaution possible in order to prevent its spread. To mask or not to mask, that is the question. And simultaneously, there are individuals around them who are going, I am so done with this. I was done this before it started. This whole thing is overblown. I just can't believe. And some of these people not only live in the same country, some of these people are relatives, some of these people are in the same small group in the same church. And what I'm pleading for is here, a little more grace when you disagree. That's what I'm asking. Bring the grace. It's anchored in the character of God. He so desires this for you. Well, I'm right. It's not always what we're saying. It's how we're saying it. High on opinion, low on grace. This is in the atmosphere that surrounds us. It's not just the virus. You take the protests that are going on with the racial issues in our country, and just a reminder, if I feel that my cause is right, does this authorize me to say whatever I want, to whoever I want to, in whatever way I want to say it? I would just plead with you, particularly among family and in friends, a small group in your church, bring the grace, bring the grace, bring the grace. Don't contribute to a culture that is high on opinion and low on mercy. Don't contribute to a culture that is high on opinion and low on grace. Bring the grace. The last issue, I'm just saying, we have an election that's coming up in November. If we weren't already torn apart by enough things, bring the grace, bring the grace, bring the grace. People are politically separated, not only within the same country, but within the same city and within the same family and within the same church and within the same small group. Well, I'm right. It's not what we're saying. It's how we're saying it and how we treat someone who has an opinion that is radically different than ours. And what should break our hearts? What should break our hearts is not that there are different opinions. What should break our hearts is that, my friends, we have totally lost our capability of having a conversation with another person who sees it from a wildly different angle, whatever it is, and treating them with dignity and treating them with respect. To treat someone with dignity and to treat someone with respect is to treat someone graciously. I would plead with you now and in this next season, a little more grace, a little more grace, a little more grace. See, this is anchored in the very character of God who came to our broken planet in the person of Jesus, who was full of grace and full of truth. And it's what he desires to grow in those who know him and who are being transformed into the likeness and character of God in whose image they are made. So let's wrap up where we started. What are you full of? When someone bumps into you, and they will, what spills out? When someone bumps into you, what will spill out this week? Our challenge this week, find that relationship, find that person, find that environment, find that context where we humble ourselves. Say, gracious and truthful God, empower me to speak the truth and bring the grace. Empower me to become a person of gracious truth and truthful grace. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into our neighborhood, and we saw the glory of God, full of grace and full of truth. May our gracious God empower you this week to love well. We'll see you next weekend.